You know that moment when someone publicly humiliates you, thinking they're standing on solid ground, completely unaware that the ground beneath them is about to crack wide open? That's exactly what happened at my stepfather's book launch. Picture this. A fancy hotel ballroom, chandeliers hanging overhead, rows of people dressed in business casual attire, all there to celebrate his new personal finance book. The kind of book that promises to teach you how to build generational wealth, how to escape the rat race, how to finally understand money. He was on stage, basking in the spotlight, answering questions from an audience that hung on his every word like he was some kind of financial messiah. Then someone asked him how his family reacted to his financial success. He chuckled into the microphone, that condescending chuckle I'd heard 1,000 times before, and said something that made my blood run cold. He said his stepchild, meaning me, was still financially illiterate, but they were working on it. Then, as if that wasn't enough, he pointed directly at me sitting in the side row and added that some kids just don't get money no matter how much you explain it to them. The room erupted in polite laughter. People turned to look at me with those pitying eyes, like I was a walking cautionary tale, a debit card that gets declined at the grocery store. I sat there with a straight face, jaw clenched, hands ice cold, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. But inside, one thought kept repeating like a drumbeat. Financially illiterate. He called me financially illiterate, while my name is literally printed on the Forbes Under 40 list with a net worth sitting comfortably around $10.3 million. What he didn't know, what nobody in that room knew except me, was that the person he just used as his punchline, his example of financial failure, was about to flip the entire narrative on its head. Because sometimes the biggest revenge isn't screaming or making a scene. Sometimes it's just calmly standing up and showing receipts. To understand why that moment cut so deep, you need to understand the history between us. My stepfather entered our lives when I was in my early teens, riding in on this wave of confidence and financial advice that my mother desperately needed at the time. Our household had been through some financial chaos before he came along, the kind that leaves you anxious about opening bills and checking bank statements. He positioned himself as the solution, the man who had it all figured out. He was building his career as a financial consultant and aspiring author, always talking about compound interest, budget spreadsheets, and the importance of cutting out daily lattes to save for retirement. On paper, he seemed like exactly what we needed. Someone stable, someone who understood money, someone who could guide us toward a better future. But what started as helpful advice quickly morphed into something else entirely. Every decision I made, every path I chose was scrutinized through his narrow lens of what financial success should look like. When I chose my college major, he questioned it. When I decided to rent instead of buy property right after graduation, he called it throwing money away. When I started exploring entrepreneurship and high-risk, high-reward opportunities in the tech startup world, he told me I was wasting my potential, that I didn't understand basic economics, that people like me end up broke when they retire. His favorite phrase became a constant soundtrack in my life: "You just don't understand money." He'd say it at dinner tables, during family gatherings, even in front of relatives and friends. It was his way of establishing dominance, of reminding everyone in the room that he was the expert and I was the perpetual student who refused to learn. My mother, bless her heart, mostly stayed silent during these exchanges. She loved him, and after years of financial instability, his apparent competence was a source of comfort for her. She saw his criticism as tough love, as someone trying to steer me away from mistakes. But what neither of them realized was that I had stopped listening to his lectures years ago, not because I was rebellious or stubborn, but because I was busy building something he couldn't even begin to comprehend. While he was still preaching about traditional employment, stable paychecks, and conservative investment strategies that belonged to the 1990s, I had entered a completely different playing field. I dove headfirst into the world of technology startups, a space where the rules he lived by simply didn't apply. I started small, learning everything I could about software development, digital marketing, and venture capital. I networked relentlessly, failed at my first two ventures, learned from those failures, and then finally hit on an idea that worked. It was a SaaS platform that solved a specific problem in the e-commerce space, something that seemed niche at first, but turned out to have massive market demand. Within 2 years, we had secured seed funding. Within 4 years, we were profitable and scaling rapidly. By year 6, we had options on the table: continue growing independently or accept an acquisition offer from a larger tech company. We chose a strategic acquisition that allowed me to retain significant equity while also cashing out a substantial portion. That single decision, combined with disciplined reinvestment into other ventures and index funds, pushed my net worth past the $10 million mark. Then came the Forbes Under 40 recognition. Forbes Under 40 isn't just a list you apply for and hope to get on. It's a curated selection of young entrepreneurs, innovators, and leaders who have made significant impact in their respective fields. When I received the email that I'd been selected, with a professional photo shoot, an in-depth profile article, and my estimated net worth published for the world to see, I felt a mix of pride and surreal disbelief. This was validation from one of the most respected business publications in the world. But here's the thing. My stepfather had no idea. None whatsoever. We barely spoke anymore beyond polite greetings at family gatherings. I never posted about the Forbes Under 40 feature on social media because I valued privacy and didn't want to come across as bragging. My mother knew I was doing well, but even she didn't grasp the full magnitude of my success. I kept it private, not out of shame, but out of self-preservation. I didn't need his validation anymore, and I certainly didn't need his lectures. The irony, the delicious, painful irony of it all, was that the man who spent years telling me I didn't understand money was still playing by an outdated rulebook, while I had quietly become the kind of success story he only wrote about in his books. The book launch was supposed to be his night, his big moment. He'd been working on this book for over 3 years, and it was finally ready for the world. The theme was all about teaching your family financial literacy, breaking generational cycles of money ignorance, and creating household wealth that lasts. Noble goals, really, if only he practiced what he preached. I debated whether to even attend. Part of me wanted to skip it entirely, to avoid the awkwardness and the inevitable condescension. But my mother asked me to come, said it would mean a lot to him, and I didn't want to create family drama by refusing. So I went, dressed casually in jeans and a simple button-down shirt, deliberately keeping a low profile. I sat in a side row, away from the main action, planning to stay quiet, clap politely, and leave as soon as it was socially acceptable. The event was impressive, I'll give him that. Professional lighting, a podium with his book cover projected on screens, tables stacked with signed copies, and an audience full of aspiring entrepreneurs, young professionals, and personal finance enthusiasts. He gave his presentation smoothly, talking about the 7 principles of family wealth, how to have money conversations with your children, and why personal financial education should start at home. Then came the Q&A session. A woman in the third row stood up and asked a question that would change everything. She asked him if he applied these principles in his own household, if his family had benefited from his expertise. I saw the shift in his expression, that little smirk that always preceded a put-down. He leaned into the microphone and said that he tried his best, but not everyone in his family was receptive to financial wisdom. Then he said it. He said his stepchild, meaning me, was still financially illiterate, that despite his best efforts, some people just chase risky ideas instead of building stable foundations. He added, with a laugh that the audience echoed, that maybe by his next book I'd finally understand what a basic budget looks like. The room erupted in polite laughter. People turned to look at me with those pitying eyes, like I was a walking cautionary tale, a debit card that gets declined at the grocery store. I sat there with a straight face, jaw clenched, hands ice cold, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. But inside, one thought kept repeating like a drumbeat: financially illiterate. He called me financially illiterate, while my name is literally printed on the Forbes Under 40 list with a net worth sitting comfortably around $10.3 million. What he didn't know, what nobody in that room knew except me, was that the person he just used as his punchline, his example of financial failure, was about to flip the entire narrative on its head. Because sometimes the biggest revenge isn't screaming or making a scene. Sometimes it's just calmly standing up and showing receipts. Saw a team of brilliant engineers solving a real problem, a market opportunity that was about to explode, and a chance to learn more in 2 years than I would in 10 years at a corporate job. That startup eventually failed, but the experience was invaluable. I learned how venture capital worked, how to build products that people actually wanted, how to iterate quickly and fail fast. More importantly, I built a network of founders, investors, and operators who would become crucial to my next venture. My second attempt was my own company. We built a SaaS platform that helped e-commerce businesses automate their inventory management and predictive analytics. It started as a side project, just me and 2 co-founders working nights and weekends, bootstrapping everything. My stepfather didn't even know it existed for the first year. When I finally mentioned it at a family dinner, he dismissed it as a hobby, something I'd grow out of once I got serious about my career. Then we got our first paying customer, then 10, then 100. We raised a seed round of $2 million from a respected VC firm. Suddenly, we had the resources to hire a proper team, invest in marketing, and scale the product. The growth was exponential. Within 3 years, we were doing 8 figures in annual recurring revenue. We had options: continue bootstrapping and growing organically, raise a Series A and swing for the fences, or accept acquisition offers from larger players who wanted our technology and customer base. We chose the acquisition route, but negotiated a deal that let me retain equity in the acquiring company, while also cashing out a significant portion up front. The numbers were life-changing. After taxes, legal fees, and paying back investors, I walked away with just over $7 million in liquid assets. But I didn't stop there. I took that capital and diversified aggressively. Indexed funds, real estate investment trusts, angel investments in other startups, and even a small venture fund with other successful founders. I reinvested the dividends, compounded the returns, and kept my living expenses relatively modest, despite my net worth climbing into 8 figures. By the time I was 32 years old, my total net worth, including equity, cash, investments, and assets, was approximately $10.3 million. Then came the Forbes recognition. Forbes Under 40 is one of those accolades that sounds impressive because it is impressive. It's not a pay-to-play listicle or a vanity publication. It's a rigorous selection process where editors and industry experts evaluate your impact, innovation, and financial success. When I got the notification that I'd been selected, I thought it was spam at first, but it was real. They flew me out for a professional photo shoot, interviewed me about my journey, and published a detailed profile that included my company's story, my investment philosophy, and yes, my estimated net worth. The article went live on their website and appeared in the print magazine. My name, my face, my achievements, all documented and publicly accessible. But here's the kicker. My stepfather had no idea. None whatsoever. We barely spoke anymore, beyond polite greetings at family gatherings. I never posted about the Forbes feature on social media because I valued privacy. My mother knew I was doing well, but I'd never sat her down and explained the full magnitude. So when I showed up at his book launch that night, wearing jeans and a casual shirt, sitting quietly in a side row, he had absolutely no context for who I'd become. In his mind, I was still the confused kid who made bad career choices. He saw me as a cautionary tale. And that's exactly why his public humiliation stung so badly. As I sat in the ballroom, listening to the audience laugh at my expense, I felt a strange calm wash over me. The initial shock and anger crystallized into something more focused, more strategic. I wasn't going to scream or cause a scene. I wasn't going to storm out dramatically. That would just make me look unstable, emotional, exactly the kind of financially irresponsible person he'd painted me as. No, this required precision. This required letting the facts speak for themselves in a way that couldn't be dismissed or spun. The Q&A session was still ongoing, and I noticed a production assistant walking through the aisles with a wireless microphone, taking questions from audience members. That microphone was my opportunity. I pulled out my phone and opened the Forbes website. My profile was still live, complete with my professional headshot, the article detailing my journey, and, most importantly, the estimated net worth figure prominently displayed. I took a screenshot just in case the Wi-Fi was unreliable. My plan was simple in concept, but required flawless execution in practice. I would wait for the right moment, raise my hand, get the microphone, and ask a question that seemed innocent at first, but would lead directly to the reveal. I wouldn't ambush him immediately. I'd give him a chance to dig his own grave a little deeper, to double down on his narrative. Then, calmly and matter-of-factly, I'd present the evidence. The key was tone. I had to sound respectful, almost curious, like I was genuinely asking for clarification rather than setting up a confrontation. If I came across as angry or vindictive, the audience would sympathize with him. But if I maintained composure and simply presented reality, the audience would draw their own conclusions. I'd frame it as a question about his definition of financial literacy, get him to commit to a standard, then show how I exceeded that standard by every possible measure. The beauty of this approach was that he couldn't deny the Forbes feature. It wasn't my opinion or my claim. It was a third-party publication with editorial credibility. It was publicly verifiable information that anyone in that room could look up on their own phone in real time. He'd have no escape route, no way to spin it. The numbers were the numbers, and they told a story that completely contradicted everything he'd just said about me. The production assistant handed me the microphone, and suddenly every eye in the room was on me. I could see my stepfather on stage, his expression shifting from confident to slightly wary as he realized who was about to speak. He probably expected me to stay silent, to take the humiliation and leave quietly like I'd done so many times before. But tonight was different. I stood up slowly, keeping my body language relaxed and open, projecting calm confidence even though my pulse was racing. I started with a smile, my voice steady and clear through the sound system. I introduced myself by name and added, with just a touch of irony, that I was his stepchild, the financially illiterate one he'd just mentioned. There was a ripple of uncomfortable laughter through the audience, people unsure if I was joking or serious. I let the moment breathe for a second, then continued. I said I had a question about how he defined financial literacy because I wanted to make sure I understood the criteria correctly. He shifted on stage, clearly caught off guard, but trying to maintain his composure. He said something vague about understanding budgets, making informed decisions, planning for the future, the usual talking points from his book. I nodded thoughtfully, as if genuinely considering his answer, then asked my follow-up question. I asked him this. If someone was under 40 years old, had been featured on a major business publications list of successful young leaders, and had a personal net worth of roughly $10.3 million, would he consider that person financially literate, or would they still need to work on understanding basic budgets? The room went completely silent. You could hear the air conditioning humming. People stopped scrolling on their phones. My stepfather froze for just a moment, his brain clearly trying to process where this was going. He recovered quickly, putting on a professional smile, and said that of course someone with that profile would be considered financially successful. Obviously, they'd understand money very well. That was my opening. I lifted my phone, making sure the screen was visible, and said that I was glad he clarified that because the person I was describing was me. I turned the phone toward the front row and the camera operator, showing them the Forbes Under 40 article with my name, photo, company details, and the estimated net worth figure clearly displayed. I explained calmly that this profile had been published earlier this year, that it was publicly available information, and that anyone in the room could verify it by simply Googling my name. The reaction was immediate and visceral. Gasps rippled through the audience. People leaned forward in their seats, craning their necks to see the phone screen. Someone in the back row said, "Oh my God," loud enough for the microphone to pick it up. A few people actually started clapping, slow at first, then building into genuine applause. The energy in the room had completely shifted. They weren't laughing at me anymore. They were reassessing everything they'd just heard. I added one more line, keeping my tone light but pointed. I said that maybe my risky ideas weren't quite as illiterate as they seemed, and perhaps his next book should have a chapter about the danger of making assumptions about people whose full story you don't actually know. Then I asked if he planned to use updated information when writing about family examples in the future, or if the old narrative was just more profitable to sell. The question hung in the air like a challenge. I handed the microphone back to the production assistant and sat down, my hands trembling slightly now that the adrenaline was wearing off. The room was buzzing with whispered conversations. People were pulling out their phones, presumably looking me up to verify what I'd just said. My stepfather's face told the whole story. His smile was frozen, his eyes wide, and for the first time in my entire life, I saw him completely at a loss for words. The private confrontation happened 3 days later. My mother insisted we all sit down and talk. We met at their house, in the same living room where he'd given me countless lectures. He started defensively, saying I'd blindsided him, that I could have told him privately instead of making a public spectacle. I let him finish, then responded with the same calm tone. I told him that for years he'd used me as a negative example, but the book launch was different. He used me as a prop in front of hundreds of people to sell books. So yes, I corrected the record publicly, because that's where he chose to attack me. He tried to argue it wasn't malicious. I cut him off. I told him if he wanted personal stories, he should use his own, not mine. And if he's claiming expertise, maybe he should know his family's actual status before making public statements. I then set my boundaries clearly. My finances and career were off limits as content. If he violated this, I would address it publicly again. He nodded stiffly. The conversation ended without reconciliation, but something had shifted. He no longer had power to define me. So what's the lesson? The people loudest about your failures often know the least about your life. My stepfather believed I was financially illiterate because he'd decided that years ago. But narratives have power if you accept them. The book launch forced my hand, and I'm grateful. For anyone who's been dismissed or belittled, know this. You don't owe anyone access to your achievements. You don't have to accept their narrative as truth. Sometimes the kindest thing is to stand up and let reality speak for itself. Your success doesn't give someone permission to use you as their punchline. My stepfather wanted to sell books by positioning himself as the wise mentor helping his financially illiterate stepchild. What he didn't realize was that that version didn't exist. The real me was busy building a multi-million-dollar net worth and getting recognized by Forbes. When those two realities collided in that ballroom, only one could survive. His narrative shattered. Mine stood firm. Because truth doesn't need embellishment. It just needs to be spoken loud enough that everyone hears it clearly.